He died fighting dragons, like a hero who had nothing left to lose. Then he opened his eyes again, in the past. Not in glory, not in power, but in a ruined family, a broken home, with no mana, and no strength. The warrior who once protected a kingdom can't even protect his own name anymore. And if he has to dirty his hands, break rules, or become something far worse than before, he'll do it. Because this time, he's here to restore a fallen dynasty. One calm, peaceful day, dragons attacked the kingdom, sparking a war that lasted 13 long years. Humans were powerless in the face of the mighty dragons, and humanity began to die. But the protagonist, Ethan, refused to give up and continued to fight, slaying one dragon after another. He is the eldest son of the Duke of Arden, renowned for his swordsmanship. The most talented swordsman on the western continent, a dragon slayer, and the last hero of the kingdom of Hydern. Ethan bore all these titles, but heroes, like mortals, were not omnipotent. One day, he was defeated by the Dragon King, Rakosis. The dragon pierced his body with its sharp claw and grabbed him, causing him to cough up blood. He looked at his opponent and hissed through his teeth that he was strong. After that, the dragon threw him with all its might, and he hit his back on the rocks and felt intense pain. Remembering how his father had said before leaving that he was leaving everything to him, he closed his eyes and said that he remembered his last words, and he was sorry that he had not kept his promise. At his sister's funeral, he had vowed to free the continent from dragons. He was not the most talented swordsman, and he was a lousy dragon slayer. He was sorry that Taran and Meyer's sacrifice was in vain. Expecting death, he fell asleep, but suddenly he heard a familiar voice calling him. His fingers twitched slightly, and when the girl screamed his name, he finally opened his eyes. Looking at her, he was very surprised. It was his sister Marie. She wiped away her tears with a smile and said that she had already thought he would never wake up. He stared at her in shock and thought, what was going on? How did she end up here? She had died as a result of the dragon attack. But he had also died, without protecting anyone. What a disgrace he was. He looked at his sister again, or rather at her clothes, and wondered why she was dressed like that. Of course he told her to be more modest, but this was going too far. But now it wasn't that important. He told her that he was glad to meet her again. How was the afterlife for her? She looked at him with a confused look. Apparently she didn't attach any importance to his words, and asked him not to risk it with himself again. It wasn't his fault. She was a fool, so he shouldn't expose himself to such danger anymore. He didn't understand what she was talking about, and at that moment, a loud rumble came from his stomach. She laughed quietly and headed to the kitchen, telling him to wait a bit. She would make soup now. He asked in surprise, was she going to cook it herself? She confirmed it, as if it was something obvious, and told him to lie down and not get up. After that, she left, and he thought that she never knew how to cook. How had not only her situation but also her character changed in the afterlife? He decided to get up and look around, but something stopped him. The life source, a magical device that sustained life during a coma. Not understanding why he needed it, he pulled out the catheter, and looking at his shaking hands, wondered why he was so weak. He could barely feel his mana, as if he had a surge or something. Could this really happen in the afterlife? He hadn't expected this. In this state, he wouldn't even be able to walk. He grabbed the life source and decided to absorb the mana from it. His body quickly filled with strength and transformed, and now he could at least stand up. Feeling much better, he stretched and thought that it seemed the first aid had more or less worked. At that moment, his sister entered the room with a tray of soup, and seeing that he was already wandering around the room, she excitedly rushed to him and exclaimed, did he turn off the life source? Does he even realize what state he is in now? He did not understand what she was talking about, and she asked how he could move at all. He told her that he was almost completely fine. He was able to move his arms and everything else just fine. She stared at him in shock, not understanding how this was possible, and said that the doctor told her that after it started, he would need at least 6 months of treatment before he could walk. He asked how long he had been unconscious, and when she said 10 years, he was very surprised. She dragged him to the bed, saying that he had just woken up, so he should not strain himself, and in order not to disturb her too much, he agreed. She offered to feed him, but he refused and asked how everything works in the afterlife. There was silence. A second later, he heard her sob. She burst into tears and exclaimed, why does he keep talking about some afterlife? He's scaring her. He's woken up. Everything's fine now. He smiled nervously and said that she died, and he too, and all their younger ones. She shouted that everyone was alive, but he continued to insist on his own, and then she exclaimed that they were not in the afterlife, and the third son, and the youngest, all alive, as were both of them. He stared at her in shock and thought, he didn't die? But he clearly remembers how the Dragon King killed him. But what if he really didn't die, and everything that is happening is real? He asked how old they both were, and when he learned that she was 20, and he was 19, he was shocked. When he was 19, dragons attacked them. So the First Continental War is just in full swing? He excitedly exclaimed, what news of the war? What happened to their father? Did he already go to the front? She asked, confused. What was he talking about? The war ended 15 years ago. Their father died then. Their family sacrificed a lot, and all for the sake of concluding a peace treaty with these monsters. He asked, dumbfounded, Did they make peace with the dragons? She confirmed it, and he thought that all of this was very strange. As far as he remembers, they didn't make any peace, as if everything was going wrong. Did he go back in time? But the past he remembers was different. If this really isn't the afterlife and he didn't die, but went back 13 years, then does that mean he ended up in a parallel world? He asked his sister what happened to the servants, and she, nervously clutching the fabric of her skirt, told him that they didn't have any. He asked the reason, and she said that there was no more money. And then he asked what happened to the family treasures. If they sell them, there will definitely be money. She didn't let him finish and firmly said that this was their home now, that they had nothing of value left. He smiled nervously and asked her to say she was joking, but she remained silent. A past different from what he remembered, where their family had fallen. He didn't believe her at first, but seeing her serious expression, he accepted the truth. His family was completely ruined. One of the 7 countries on the western continent, the kingdom of Hydern, was the smallest. But the family of Duke Arden, swordsmen unrivaled on the entire continent, hailed from here. Thanks to their merits, they had always lived in luxury, even when humanity was on the brink of extinction, and now they were in some shack. He asked his sister in shock, had they been living like this for 10 years? She only nodded in response, and he thought he remembered a completely different past. He thought he had died in battle with the Dragon King, but somehow he found himself in a time when he was 19 years old, and his family was ruined. What's going on? He excitedly told his sister that she had said their family had sacrificed a lot during the war. Shouldn't the Emperor have rewarded them? She replied that they had already received their reward, immunity. His Majesty the 17th King Sigmund had declared them defenders of the kingdom and ordered them to be treated accordingly. MC was surprised that even the king was different here, and she continued, saying that he had granted him, the first in line to the succession, immunity, meaning he was exempted from responsibility for any crimes except treason. Starting with him, the immunity would last for 3 generations, he thought. So any crime except treason would be unheard of? So even murder would be forgiven? That's a lot of power. He asked, is that all? Marie said that they were also given gold and jewelry, but the family keeps them to themselves. He didn't understand what she meant. She had said that their home was now here. Marie said that wasn't entirely true. They were moved to this hunting lodge 10 years ago by order of the Senate, which temporarily took over the Arden family. His face darkened, and he angrily asked who had the nerve to do such a thing. She said the Senate consisted of 10 indirect descendants of the Arden family. After the battle with the dragons, in which their father, Hoda, and grandfather died, the king ordered the Senate to temporarily care for the family. King Sigmund seemed afraid that from a young age he would abuse his immunity and position as head of the family. Ethan nervously gritted his teeth and thought that their king was a real idiot. And this Sigmund was even worse. He didn't think the Senate would decide to take everything into its own hands and persecute them. He asked about the position of head of the family, and she, giving him a bowl of soup, told him that they would hold a vote when he turned 20. He asked, so it had not yet been decided that he would become head of the family? She answered him that this was the original plan, but while he was in a coma, the Senate abandoned it. He started eating the soup and thought that if he became the head of the family, things would be hard for them. In that case, he would be able to kill everyone who made his family suffer with impunity. He ate all the soup and thought that there were still 8 months left until his 20th birthday, and Marie burst into tears again and asked him for forgiveness. It was all her fault. If she had tried harder, he would not have fallen into a coma because of the mana surge. Now he understood everything. 10 years ago, when he was 9, he tried his best to regain the skill of foresight that their family had lost. However, when he tried to restore it, he suffered a mana surge. His brothers and sister had no real power and were unable to stop the tyranny of the Senate. Marie was only 10 years old then. He asked his sister not to cry. What was her fault here? She answered him that she should have somehow protected the family, and he said that it was his own fault for placing such responsibility on her. She put her hand on his shoulder and asked him to look at her. She was no longer crying, but smiling and saying that everything was fine. Now the only thing that mattered was that he was alive and well. He smiled slightly and handed her an empty plate, praising her cooking, and she said that she was glad that he liked everything. Let him rest. He had just come to his senses. They wished each other good night, and MC was left alone. He thought that it was such a mess here. Of course, he was glad that he got into this world and was able to see his sister again. But the king placed the Senate at the head of the family in order to block his power, and this Senate exiled his family, finally seizing power. He doesn't know why he ended up here after his death, but he knows exactly what to do. In these 8 months, he should fully recover. He will return everything that rightfully belongs to them and show what happens to those who decide to stand in the way of the Arden family. A new day dawned. Marie looked at the soup she had just made with a smile and thought that Ethan had liked it yesterday. She decided to go wake him up and bring him breakfast. But when she came out of the kitchen, she saw 3 servants laughing unpleasantly. Her face immediately became displeased. She approached the chief chamberlain named Hans and asked him to leave them for today. He arrogantly answered her that it was impossible. Their job was to look after them. She had already started to ask him, but he approached her menacingly and said that she seemed to have misunderstood something. He was a member of the family of Baron Kargas, not Duke Arden. He chuckled contentedly, and the other servants also began to laugh at her, and she had no choice but to go wake Ethan. When they came down from the second floor, he saw these servants. They began to eat breakfast, and he told Marie that she seemed to have said that they did not have servants. She answered him that these were not their servants. They were provided by other families. He said discontentedly that nevertheless they should serve them, and not idle chatter. If they were so useless, there was no need to keep them here. She said that they would always send others in their place, and they would not listen to her. But MC, unlike her, was not going to tolerate all this, and so he got up from the table and told her to start eating without him, and he would go and chat with those guys for a while. Meanwhile, the chief chamberlain took a well-furnished room for himself, sat leisurely on the sofa and thought. He wondered why she asked them to leave. Was it because the Archduke had woken up? One could only dream of such a job. A hunting lodge, known to everyone as a place of exile, but the longer he lives here, the more he likes it. He was sent here by the Senate, so the Archduchess cannot order him around. He does nothing all day, and he even gets paid for it. But could there be a better job? The Duke also woke up after a 10-year coma, and he was sure he would be well paid for this information. He told his subordinate to prepare a letter, and at that moment, Ethan's voice was heard behind him. He called out to him, forcing him to turn around, then hit him in the face with all his might, sending him flying to the other end of the room. The chamberlain was shocked. He grabbed the spot where he had been hit and asked, "Who dared do that?" But when he saw the Archduke himself, he was both terrified and surprised. And the Archduke glared at him. He backed away in fear, telling him not to come any closer, but the Archduke ignored him, and grabbing him by the clothes, lifted him off the floor. He cried out in fear and said that he was practically a nobleman. So what if he was an Archduke? MC gave him a displeased look, asking what he meant, and this made him even more nervous. But he still plucked up the courage to speak. Just because he was an Archduke didn't give him the right to treat him like this. He thought Baron Kargas's family would let him get away with this. He grinned, then slapped him as hard as he could and hit him a few more times, causing the other servants to tremble in fear. MC said it was okay to dream. He thought the pathetic Baron and his family could protect him. He meant to say he didn't respect the Arden family. Hans asked why he was doing this to him, and he asked in return, did he really not understand? He was already raising his hand for the next blow, and the boy understood everything. It was all because of the Archduchess. He ordered the servants to quickly help her grace, and then Ethan let him go. He firmly squeezed his shoulder and told him to listen to him carefully, to try to be more useful. The guy immediately fell at his feet, saying that he would definitely be more useful, and thought he was crazy. When MC headed for the exit, he looked after him and thought, where did so much strength come from in such a weak body? He probably used mana. He needed to urgently report everything to the Baron. He would pay for this. Ethan at this time returned to his room and realized that he was quite weakened. If he had not used the mana he had prepared in advance, he would have made a fool of himself. They are insolent. How dare they cross the Arden family? He was so angry with the Senate that he swore to cut off their heads and show who owned the duchy. First, he decided to check the condition of his body and sat down on the bed to meditate. He felt something. He thought he knew it. Due to the release of mana, it disintegrated into fragments. In his arms and legs, palms and ankles, they're everywhere. But honestly, it's not that bad. In some ways, it's even good. If he were a simple knight, he would have died long ago, but he's still the best swordsman on the continent. He filled himself with energy, and thought that this was quite good for a body that had been unconscious for 10 years. However, the veins through which mana flows were weakened. He decided to fix everything gradually, and start with resonance. With resonance, you absorb mana of the corresponding wavelength from the environment, and concentrate it in one point until you restore the required amount. He decided to start with the hand that holds the sword and concentrated. In the afternoon, he left the house and stretched, thinking that he had dedicated the whole morning to resonance. Now it was time to practice. Before honing his technique, he needed to at least restore his endurance. He did push-ups, ran, and this continued until the evening. The servants, who had been watching him all this time, thought he was a monster. He was training so much in his condition. Suddenly, a child's voice was heard calling for the Archduchess. MC immediately noticed him and asked, who the hell was he? Why was he looking for her? He caught his breath and told him that Sir Myers had made a scene in the bar again, and if her ladyship didn't stop him, things would get bad. And who was he? He hadn't seen him before. Ethan was very surprised. In the past, he would never have touched alcohol. Food, sleep, and training, muscles and milk, that was all he thought about. He ate protein. Since childhood, he had been bigger than all of them. And he, obsessed with training and a strict schedule, made a scene in the bar. He called Hans and said that they would go and find Myers. Hans led him to the bar, and before entering, he said that the young Duke had recently been seen here with some thugs, and he thought he was here today too. MC thought that, apparently, This wasn't the first time this had happened to Myers. He was causing trouble and associating with all sorts of idiots. Could this really be his hardworking brother? What had happened to him? When they entered the bar, a chair thrown by Myers flew in front of them. He was so drunk that he started causing a ruckus and demanding more drinks. Seeing him in such a state, Ethan was very surprised and wondered what had happened to his pure and kind heart. From the sidelines, he heard laughter. The other patrons of the bar found the Duke's behavior very funny, and this made MC very angry. He slammed his fist on the table, breaking it in half, then looked at them menacingly. Myers used to be a brave warrior. He bravely fought monsters. And now he was a drunkard whom everyone laughed at. Seeing his brother, he called out loudly and asked, "Is he drunk?" Why was he seeing his brother? Was he sleeping? Ethan stared at him in surprise and thought that he had always been silent but fierce. The way he was acting now made him very angry. He hit him on the back of the head, causing him to lose consciousness, and said that he would deal with his problem later. Meanwhile, Hans pointed at the thugs who were bothering his brother. And one of them thought, "Is this the Archduke? Didn't he die 10 years ago from a mana surge?" He decided not to make things worse and told his men to leave since the Archduke was immune, after which he smiled at his lordship and said that they were so worried about the young master. He got very drunk, but now he was calm. Perhaps it was time for them to leave. MC turned to him with an enraged look that almost scared him. He smiled nervously and realized that things were bad. What should he do now? He asked the Archduke to tell the young master that they had a great time, and he menacingly walked towards him, asking who gave them permission to leave. One of his subordinates stopped Ethan, saying that he was too weak. He should leave them alone while he was in one piece. But MC did not tolerate such insolence, and punched him in the face with all his might, causing him to fly into the wall with a crash. A small cut appeared on the face of the leader of these thugs, and he was a little confused, not even realizing what had happened. Ethan said that it seemed the Duke's family was truly disrespected now. How dare they, pathetic insects, laugh at the Duke's people? They had made a terrible mistake. Seeing him attack, the man became very nervous, and when he saw mana at his fingertips, he was surprised. He thought he couldn't use it anymore, but with that amount, he could handle it without any problem. He prepared to parry the attack, but MC struck so quickly that he couldn't even react, which broke his arms and fingers. Feeling the pain, he screamed loudly, and his subordinates pounced on Ethan, while he thought, how could they even have the nerve to mess with them? He would avenge his little brother. After that, the whole bar was filled with screams, and Hans, watching this bloody spectacle, was horrified and thought that he was just a monster. Finally, MC finished. He called out to the servant and ordered him to clean up the place, and he and his brother would go home. Time passed. Soon after the death of their father, his mother followed him. Myers was too young, so he barely remembers his parents. For him, Ethan replaced them. He became almost like a father to him. Waking up from a dream, Myers jumped out of bed and called his brother, after which he caught his breath and thought that it seemed like he had gotten so drunk yesterday that he even imagined his brother. But that's impossible. If he were stronger, he would be here now. He burst into tears and asked him for forgiveness, and at that moment, MC entered the room and asked, was he calling him? Seeing him, he immediately stopped crying and asked in surprise, was it really him? He answered him with a smile that he was with them again, and then Myers jumped out of bed and threw himself at him with a tight hug and burst into tears again, but this time from happiness. Ethan thought that it seemed like it was just a temporary clouding of consciousness. He hadn't changed at all. He said that he couldn't breathe and he stank of alcohol. And then he immediately took a step back and asked him for forgiveness. He wouldn't touch the bottle again. He asked why he was so strict with himself. They were together again, so they could have a glass. And where was Taryn? As soon as he said his name, the guy shuddered. And MC said that Marie hadn't told him anything about him. Are they hiding something? Trying to find the words, he scratched his head and said that he went to another family to study their technique. He said that since his grandfather and father had died, he was in a coma, and they no longer had precognition. He'd better leave. Ethan was shocked by this. He exclaimed, "What does this all mean?" He answered that he himself didn't know the details, and he asked, did he at least say where he went? There was a knock. Hans called him, and he thought that he was, as always, on time. With a heavy sigh, he allowed him in and asked what he wanted. Hans handed him a bag of coins. He took them while wrapping up things. MC was happy because they were really short of money. He gave Hans his share and praised him, and he was so happy that his eyes even sparkled. Ethan thought that he understood everything quickly, and he was useful. Could Taryn really be in trouble too? It's a pity he doesn't know where he went, but at least he's alive. He must revive their family, and he decided to start with Myers. He put a chair in front of him and told him to sit down and show him his wrist. He'll check if he'd ruined himself with booze. As soon as he touched his wrist, he felt that the energy was polluted, but his mana was normal. Does he not have any foresight at all? If he had mastered the family breathing technique, his mana would have burned like a flame. At least he is still as talented as before. He let him go and said that everything is not so bad. If he starts training, he can very well become a knight. But his condition is far from ideal, so he will have to choose between attack and defense. Myers was surprised and asked if he was joking about the knight. He answered him with a smile that he believed in him. He knows the secrets of their family, and he will help him become a knight if, of course, that is what he wants. Myers was confused and said that he thought it was impossible, so he has to choose between attack and defense. Then he will choose defense. He will protect him and their entire family. MC said that in that case he will have to train hard. Is he sure he is ready for this? He nodded confidently. After which, Ethan immediately called Hans and ordered him to bring sandbags and wooden swords. He looked out the window and thought that the secrets of their broken family were kept within him. Of course, starting training at 15 is too late, but he has potential. It will make him a worthy man. Meanwhile, in the house of Baron Kargas, the head of the family, Baron Helmut, received news that the Archduke had woken up. He called a servant and handed him a letter, asking him to send it to Count Furness, after which he thought that Archduke Ethan was talented and in good shape, his gaze just like his father's. He needed to quickly inform the Senate that the spirit of the homeland had returned. Meanwhile, MC began training his brother. He advised him to shape the sword when he swings. Then the attack will not be a separate movement, but a sequence of movements. He demonstrated this to him. Of course, he couldn't withstand such a barrage of blows and fell. And his brother told him that therefore when he blocks an attack, he shouldn't concentrate on one blow. He needs to parry blow after blow. If he understood everything, let him get up. The enemy won't wait for him to fall. Or is his will that weak? Myers answered him that, of course it wasn't so, then took the sword and energetically exclaimed that he hadn't given up yet. He would block his blow, no matter the cost. Ethan prepared himself and praised his spirit, after which they continued training. Hans, meanwhile, watched them from the window. He thought that they had been training since early morning without a break. They were like monsters. He turned his brother, whom he hadn't seen for 10 years, into a bloody mess. Or is this how the ducal family expresses love? And it seems the young master enjoys being beaten. He doesn't understand them. If he beats his own brother like that, he needs to be careful and not get on his nerves. He especially needs to be kind to the Archduchess, considering what he did. Marie, standing next to him, also watched them and thought with a smile that she didn't understand how they were supposed to live now. So much had changed since Ethan woke up. She noticed the servants going about their business outside the house and thought that it was from that day on that everyone started working hard. She turned to Hans, which frightened him, and asked what Ethan had said to him that made everyone start working. Hans's face turned pale. Ethan didn't speak. He was beating him. Horrible memories flooded him, and he laughed nervously. Marie called out to him, and he thought that if the Archduke spoke like that, he didn't want to talk to him anymore. He apologized to the Archduchess and handed her a plate of cookies, fresh from the oven, saying that the weather was wonderful today. Perhaps she would like a tea party? She accepted the cookies gratefully, then looked at him suspiciously, and wondered why he changed the subject. He didn't want to answer the question. As soon as she tried the cookies, she no longer cared. Time passed. Hans retired to his room and took out a crystal ball to contact the Baron. He took out a small stone and thought that he needed to be careful. This stone was worth as much as he earned in a month. He placed it near the crystal ball and it activated. Helmut said that he was waiting for his report. Had the Archduke woken up? Hans confirmed this and added that he could already use mana. The Baron thoughtfully noted that this meant he was still as talented as he had been 10 years ago. The Elders' meeting was coming soon, so he should keep him informed. He was about to finish, but Hans said that the Archduke was very cruel, so they needed to be careful. The Baron said it didn't matter. Everything would go the way they wanted at the meeting. He would secretly send him more money, and Hans would keep an eye on him. Hans was very happy and thanked him, after which the Baron said that he would expect his report in a month, and left. Hans thought it was fantastic. Here it was, a once-in-a-lifetime chance. The Baron said this because he had no idea how strong the Archduke was. He would watch for now, and then join the winner. If the Archduke wins, it wouldn't be such a bad idea to stay close to him so he could reap the benefits later. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and a maid informed him that the Dukes had finished training. He excitedly told her to bring cold water and wet towels and make some tea right away. The servant left, and he thought that for now he should try not to get on the Archduke's nerves. Time passed, and the training continued. MC struck. This time, Myers was able to block it, and he thought with a grin that they had only been training for a couple of days, and he was already starting to get used to his blows. He lunged forward, deciding to test him one more time, and Myers became slightly nervous, but swung his sword. A loud thud was heard, and Ethan froze and saw his brother's stunned face. He managed to block his blow, and he was so happy that he shouted about it throughout the area. He was already happy that he had become a professional, but MC quickly brought him to his senses with a blow to the head, and said that he was still a long way from that. When he thinks he has parried a blow, he can easily lose his guard. He should not forget that. Myers grabbed his head, and Ethan thought that even though he said so, he must admit that he has innate strength and endurance, and he also knows how to adapt quickly. Perhaps Myers will soon be able to fight on equal terms with a real knight. Hans ran up to him, ingratiatingly handing him a towel and saying that snacks are already waiting for them on the table. How was training? He looks better every day. MC didn't understand why he was fawning over him, after which Hans collected their weapons and led them to the table, dubiously saying that he actually had something to tell him. Baron Kargas contacted him today. Ethan sat down at the table and asked why he was doing this. He replied that he had ordered him to keep an eye on them and report everything to him. But who did he take him for? He was his loyal servant. He was ready to curse him. MC, of course, didn't believe him, and when Hans proudly said that he had begged him for more money, he looked at him with interest, because he needed the money. The Chamberlain said that if he needed anything, he should feel free to use the Baron's money. Ethan asked him to bring paper and a pen, after which he wrote something and thought he was being impudent, trying to wait it out, and then join one of them. But it's okay. He himself wouldn't mind using him for his own purposes. It's easiest with simpletons like that. He handed him a piece of paper and told him to buy it all in the city, this training equipment. Hans carefully read the list, and MC said that no matter how much the Baron sent him, everything that was left was his. He immediately went off obediently to carry out all the instructions, and Ethan, watching him leave, turned to his brother and asked what he knew about Providence. He answered that he knew nothing. He thought his sister and brother did too. To be honest, he was surprised that he knew. Did his father teach him this? He hesitantly confirmed this and said that he ordered Hans to buy everything needed for the battle. He did not understand what battle he was talking about, and he said that he had to return glory to their family, and therefore, to begin with, they would make a true knight out of him, the youngest of the Arden. Their providence is fundamentally different from that of other families. It requires tremendous determination. Is he ready to throw away all the mana he has accumulated over his life? He was surprised at first, and then confidently answered that he was ready to do it for the sake of the family. Time passed. A boy knocked on Sir Vildan's room and warned him that the young master had burst in and started a fight. Vildan immediately left the warm bed and his woman, asking, did he hear right? Until yesterday, he drank like a pig, and today he came to cause trouble at the Red Scorpion headquarters. Training began 2 days ago. Ethan asked Myers to sit in the lotus position. He would teach him breathing techniques. He knows, right? The black flame is the basis of the Arden family's providence, and the basis of the black flame is breathing. Myers concentrated and thought that the black flame was the symbol of their family, and if he went through all 4 stages, resonance, dispersal, circulation, and enlightenment, would his mana truly transform into black flame? MC said that as a true descendant of the Arden family, he should master the black flame. First, he needed to get rid of all his mana, let him empty the mana center, and then fill it with flame. Myers concentrated, began to draw the flames into himself, took a deep breath, and slowly activated his mana center, after which he was surrounded by burning flames. Time passed, and towards evening he finally finished. Seeing his body ablaze, he asked with a smile, so this is what mana is like in their family? He felt something completely different. Ethan praised him for his efforts. It would be difficult at first, but if he trained diligently, he would feel how everything would change when his mana finally became flames. It would take about 2 months for the resonance to complete, and to prepare for it, they needed to go somewhere. They went to the Red Scorpion's headquarters. Hans took them there and said that they were the ones who bullied the young master. According to rumors, their elder possessed mana. MC said that none of this mattered and told his brother to begin. Taking a deep breath, he kicked down the door to the bar and shouted, "Are they ready to die?" All the bar patrons looked at him, not understanding what had happened to him, and he, taking out his sword, exclaimed that they would pay for daring to insult the Duke's family. He approached 2 guys and one of them, confused, asked him to wait. They had been drinking together just the other day and called each other brothers. What kind of joke was this? Myers immediately hit him in the face with a wooden sword, asking if it looked like he was joking. From this blow, he fell. Everyone else became aggressive towards him and decided to pounce on him. Meanwhile, MC stood to the side and watched this. He thought that Myers had become much stronger over the past few days, but it seemed he still lacked confidence. Most likely, he was ashamed of everything he had done, so he brought him here, even though it was not safe. This way, he could atone for his sins and get rid of the burden on his soul. One of the guys attacked Myers with a knife. Seeing this, he got a little nervous, and then got hit and winced in pain. Ethan thought that was pretty good. He exposed the part of his body that would suffer the least to the attack. After that, Myers hit his attacker with a shield, and MC thought that by trying to dodge, he would give them an advantage and open himself up to attacks. He turned to Hans, saying that he was doing well. And what did he think of him? He stared at him in fear, thinking that he was so creepy. His brother had just been hit with a sword, and he was smiling. He smiled nervously and told him that he expected nothing less from the young master, and he had only picked up a shield for the first time a couple of days ago. Finally, the leader of this gang came. His loud voice came from the 2nd floor. He ordered them all to stop and turned to Myers, asking what to make of all this. He thinks he can get away with it? Noticing the boy's intense gaze below him, He immediately realized it was the Archduke. His beaten brother was saying he was simply a monster. He asked if he had broken his dear brother's arms. He confirmed it and asked if he had anything else to say. Vilden sighed with displeasure and thought he was being so arrogant. He would have hit him, but he needed to restrain himself. First, he needed to discuss everything with the Baron. He suggested that Ethan end the matter here. They had suffered great damage, but given his family's reputation, they would part peacefully. He only laughed in response and thought, he had almost ruined his brother, and now he was pretending to be kind? He went up to the second floor and told his brother that they were all scum, and there was no point in pitying them. It seemed that if they wanted to teach them a lesson, they would have to cripple everyone. Vilden began to get angry and threatened his lordship that if he continued, he would have to intervene. He activated the fire mana and told him to begin, and he, seeing this flame, was very surprised. He had heard that the mana of the Arden family members burns like flames. It can't be, is it true? But surely the rumors are all exaggerated. Even if it is fire mana and the Archduke, he doesn't care. In response, he showed his mana and mentally asked, does he think the mighty Vilden will be afraid of him? MC was slightly surprised by his strength, and at that moment, the man pounced on him with his fists, exclaiming, does he regret his actions now? He easily dodged his blow, and with a smirk called him a fool, after which he delivered several quick blows, which caused him to lose his balance and fall on his back. After that, Ethan approached him and asked who taught him this breathing technique. It seems he is stealing fighting techniques. Vilden grew nervous and remained silent, and then MC grabbed him and threatened him with a fiery fist to make him talk. The man excitedly asked him to wait and exclaimed that Baron Kargas had taught him this. The Baron had contacted him some time ago and told him to ruin the life of the youngest of the ducal family. They needed to render him useless so he couldn't fulfill his role. Vilden told him that if he didn't want to leave traces, it would take a long time. The only way to do it faster would be with various medicines. The Baron said they wouldn't be necessary. He had 3 years, and he hoped he wouldn't let him down. The man said it would take a long time, and the payment would be appropriate, so the Baron handed him a scroll and said that it should be enough. He asked what it was, and the Baron told him it was a scroll describing the Arden family's breathing technique. If he saw results, he would receive a scroll on strength training on top. Unrolling the scroll, Vilden was very surprised. It really was that technique. He immediately knelt before him, promising to do his best, and the Baron laughed contentedly, saying that he had always served him diligently and that he would need it again in the future. Right now, Ethan was watching this through a crystal ball. He grinned and thought, does he imagine himself a knight? But since he had retained the memory sphere, he didn't really trust the Baron. Hans came to him with a report. The young master dealt with everyone, and they took back the illegally appropriated money. The young master also took care of their leader. Should he bring him? He answered that the memory sphere would be enough for now and thought. The collateral families appropriated the family's secret techniques and attempted to harm their direct descendants, not to mention their connections to illegal substances, gambling, murder, and underground business. There was plenty of evidence, but it was not yet time. The Baron was the weakest of the 10 collateral families, but in his condition, fighting his knights would be too difficult. Using resonance mana, he sowed seeds of flame and began to fill them. So far, there was only enough for his wrist, head, neck, back, chest, shoulders, pelvis, hips, ankles, and when the last mana center in the heart starts circulating, Helmut Kargas will be the first one he deals with. He asked Hans to hide the memory sphere somewhere, and he could keep the money for himself. He was very happy and asked if he could really take everything. MC confirmed this and threateningly said that he would be better off forgetting what he had seen today if he valued his life. These words immediately made him nervous and said that he hadn't seen anything. After some time, Helmut found out about what had happened and was, to put it mildly, furious. He slammed his fist on the table, cursing the Archduke. How dare he destroy his source of income? He had been lying in bed for 10 years, and now he was doing this. He clutched his head and thought that if it weren't for this royal immunity, he wouldn't have done anything. Maybe he should just kill him? But these are his territories. He will definitely be suspected, and the Senate will take advantage of the moment and dump all their sins on him. He will lay low for now. There will be a meeting in 2 months. He will come up with something before then. His servant approached him, saying he had received a letter from Hans, and he rudely snatched it from his hands. The butler said it seemed to be no mistake. What would he order him to do? The Baron was furious. He tore up the letter and shouted, has he completely lost his mind? He asked for 100 gold pieces to be sent to him. He slammed his fist on the table several times, cursing loudly, and ordered the butler to send the money and make sure he didn't cheat him. 3 days later, at the Arden hunting estate, workers began repairing the estate, while Ethan continued meditating, having already managed to fill half the mana centers in his hands. Hans knocked on the door, received permission, and entered the room, saying he hoped he had slept well. The young master and the Archduchess were already waiting for him in the dining hall. After getting dressed, MC went down to the first floor and noted that it looked like the repairs were almost finished. Hans confirmed this. The Red Scorpions had more money than they thought, and they'd managed to expand their budget. Ethan waved him off and said that it wasn't their gold anyway, they could keep the rest. The Chamberlain thanked him, and when MC entered the dining hall and saw his sister, he said that the outfit suited her. She smiled and said that it was the Chamberlain's work. He smiled contentedly and thought that Hans hadn't wasted any time. Now they looked like a duke's family. He told his sister that he would do everything to ensure that she always ate and dressed well, and the Chamberlain proudly wiped his nose. When they started eating, Ethan asked his brother how his wound was. He stretched and told him that everything was fine. It would heal by next week. MC thought for a moment and remembered something. He smiled and asked if they were familiar with the family ceremony for which this estate was built. They hadn't heard anything like that, and he wondered if they really weren't aware of it in this reality. He had warned Hans that they were going hunting in the Puskas Mountains, and he had said that in that case he would order the servants to pack. But Ethan had said that there was no need. The four of them would go, which surprised the Chamberlain slightly. A week later, they were already in the mountains. Hans, who was carrying a huge backpack, was quite tired. He tried to catch his breath and thought that it had been a hellish week. Vile monsters had been attacking them since the first day. He had lost count of how many times he had thought he was going to die, and without the Archduke, this would have happened. And he had the feeling that he was deliberately throwing himself at them. Maybe he should train his brother better when they returned? He didn't want to go through this ever again. Finally, they were there at the fire temple. MC opened the doors and thought that one of their ancestors had found this place many centuries ago. Since then, the Arden family has always held farewell ceremonies and blessing ceremonies here. The Arden children are usually brought here at the age of 10 to meet the spirits. The energy they receive from the spirits helps them get used to the fire. This is a traditional ritual through which one can master the flame. Hans, confused, called out to him and asked if he was sure he could come here. He smiled and replied that he could, adding in his mind that this way he would understand whose side to choose. They approached the ceremonial altar, and he took off his backpack, saying that everything was very simple. When they made an offering to the spirits and saw the fire, let them dance. They were surprised, and he said that they could do anything, as long as it was bright and noticeable. Then the spirits would gather around them and give a blessing. They were confused, because everything sounded quite simple, and he thought that even history over the past 15 years was different. Not to mention the past. The Arden had made a contract hundreds of years ago. What if the contract had already been broken here? Then they would have to cope without a blessing. He decided to begin, and after making offerings, address the fire spirits, saying that they, the descendants of Arden, had come to give gifts, light fires, and dedicate a dance to them. Suddenly, a flame flared above the altar, and he thought the passage was open. The spirits had come. Laughter rang out. A mid-level spirit named Ifrit chose Myers, while Marie had a low-level salamander. The flames blazed more intensely, and the spirits turned to the altar, asking if even she had come. Ethan had been a fire lord in his past life, so his spirit must be a match. He spread his arms and asked, "So who will bless him?" The flames intensified, and the spirits were surprised that the Empress had descended personally, and MC thought that this spirit was much more powerful than the one in his previous life. The Empress ordered the blood of Arden to bow before her and turned to Ethan, asking menacingly, was it he who summoned her? He confidently confirmed it and asked her to grant him her blessing. Immediately after, he was transported to another space where there was nothing but spirit. The Empress said that this was his inner world, the world of fire. She was Rorosha, the mistress of fire. So be it, she would take pity and grant him a blessing. But was he trying to control her flames? He smiled nervously, wondering if he had fallen for that. He apologized to her if he had gone too far. He thought it would be nice to combine their powers. In his mind, he noted that she had a rather cute name for a fire lord. She chuckled, saying that he was funny. So be it, she would give him a chance. If he could master even a fraction of her power, his blessing would be much better. Let him show what he is capable of. He smiled and got down to business, while his family was worried. Marie turned to her brother and asked if he thought Ethan would be okay. He had been in the fire for over an hour, but still hadn't moved. He told her that he was only sure that something was happening, but their brother would definitely cope. Meanwhile, MC tried to concentrate. He told himself to remember how it felt when he could control the fire. He needed to use the breath of black flame. He sharply raised his hand, gathering the flames, and he succeeded. He clenched his fist and turned to the Empress with a confident smile, saying that it looked like he had won. She smirked and said it was a small particle, but there was someone who could handle it. He was a funny little man. A promise is a promise. She gave him a blessing and said that he could do with it whatever he wanted. He thought that when he learned to control the flame, he learned that with its help you can cleanse every vein. He started doing this. It was so hot that he screamed, but despite the pain, he continued. Myers called out to him worriedly, but the torment was already over. He felt a new strength in his body, and Rorosha asked if he was satisfied now. He told her that he was, but he would like to ask her to bless the two of them. She breathed, sending streams of fire at them, and said that it was a great honor to be blessed by her personally. Streams of fire began to cut into their bodies, causing them to become agitated, after which Rorosha told Ethan that she thought they would see each other again. In parting, she said that she had fun and left. MC clenched his fist and thought that this was a rather strange coincidence, but now his body was stronger and his veins were almost completely cleared. In this state, he would be one of the strongest on the continent. He glanced at his sister and brother and thought that they would need more time. He would wait until they got the flames under control. Hans, meanwhile, was in shock. He couldn't believe he'd seen the fire mistress, who was only a legend, with his own eyes. The Archduke was already a monster, and now that he had the blessing, he'd become even stronger. Now he understood why he brought him here. Now he was certain whose side to take. Marie finally mastered her new strength. She looked at her brother and asked in confusion, "Is he really Myers?" He examined his body and noticed that it had changed too. Ethan said that the fire blessing changes everything. Bones, muscles, veins. That's why they can feel different now. Myers said he never thought everything would change so much. It seemed incredible to him. MC smiled and thought they'd managed to gain the favor of the Overlord himself. He hadn't even hoped for such luck. He was lucky to have retained the memories of his past life. Suddenly, a loud rumble was heard. They both grabbed their stomachs, and Myers asked with an awkward smile if it was normal that they were so hungry. He answered that everything was fine. Their bodies had just completely rebuilt. He headed for the exit and suggested that they go to a nice place. After a while, they emerged from this place completely full, and Myers said that he didn't expect there to be a rest house next to the temple. He found this surprising. Hans was also pleased, and when Myers asked his brother where they were going, Ethan stepped on something and thought that he had finally found it. His brother asked if he decided to surprise them with something else. He confirmed this and advised them to get ready. He opened a hidden hatch, and Myers, looking inside, let out an enthusiastic sigh. They went underground, and he looked around, asking if this was some kind of warehouse. MC confirmed this. They store hunting spoils here. He noticed a magic circle on the wall, a spell that protected things from damage. It looked like something useful was stored here. Suddenly, Hans let out an excited exclamation, showing the Archduke his find and excitedly saying that it was peacock skin, something all the girls in the capital dreamed of, but it was impossible to get, especially of such high quality. Ethan asked how much it would sell for, to which he replied that it all depended on demand. At least 30 platinum. Myers, shocked, exclaimed that it was 3,000 gold. And his brother reminded him that he was a member of the Duke's family and should control himself. He cleared his throat awkwardly, and MC thought that this money would come in handy in the future. He told Hans with a smile that he hadn't known he knew anything about such things, and he laughed sheepishly, saying that his father was a merchant, and as a child he traveled all over the kingdom, wanted to become his assistant, but ended up here. He thought there must have been reasons for that, and he said that he would then rely on him to find some large and reliable merchant. They took the leather and left. Hans excitedly promised him that he would try, and soon they returned to the estate. Ethan was busy with business as usual, but he was distracted by the Chamberlain. He found a trading group ready to buy everything from them. Their representative was here now. He asked the name of the group, and when he said, "Misas," his face suddenly became gloomy. Noticing his reaction, Hans became nervous and said that they were considered the most enterprising. Something wrong? He patted him on the shoulder and said that he had done a good job, and now they needed to meet with their representative. The Chamberlain looked after him in bewilderment, and he went to the meeting. Entering the reception room, he apologized to the representative of the trading group for the delay, and he stood up to greet him. "He's Michelin, the head of the Mises trading group." MC sat down across from him and asked him to give his real name. "Business relationships should be built on trust. He agrees with him, right?" The guy didn't understand what he meant, and he said that his father told him that the Marquis of Bessus's family has a tradition. The future head of the family must live completely independently for several years. That's probably why he hides his true identity. He nervously answered that he was confusing him with someone else, and he asked if he would continue hiding behind a mask. The guy remained silent and thought that he had been living independently from the family for 3 years, hiding his identity. His voice was so unrecognizable that even the king wouldn't have guessed. In fact, Ethan knew about this because in a past life, he himself told him everything. The guy sighed heavily and remarked that he was very perceptive, in which case he would reintroduce himself. "His name is Jaron Bessus." MC said that it was a pleasure to meet him and offered to start negotiations. It's unlikely he's encountered what he's about to offer. Is he interested in potion making? Jaron was surprised and asked, "Does he even know anything about that?" He replied that he learned about it by pure chance. In a past life, to counter the dragons, many families shared their secret techniques, one of which was potion making. Only he and the one who developed it know the full process. The family of the Marquis of Bessus gave all their money to support their family, and he trusts no one as much as they do. What will Jaron decide? At this point, he wondered suspiciously, why did he suddenly mention potion making? He intrigued him with such a serious offer. Since he knew his true identity, he was unlikely to lie. He asked why he chose his family, to which Jaron replied that 15 years ago, their family greatly helped them during the war with the dragons. It's funny. The two families that contributed the most are ruined and stripped of influence, while the pathetic parasites who lurked in the shadows feast on the bodies of the fallen. He can't trust them with such information. In 7 months, he will officially become the head of the family. Before then, he would like to get rid of all the traitors, and he hopes his family will support them again. Jaren thought, hadn't he just recently woken up from a 10-year coma? But it won't just be the Senate that will stand in his way, but also the 7 great families of the kingdom. They envy the Arden, who received immunity and the title of protectors of the kingdom, and therefore support the Senate, which is destroying the family from within. The king, who didn't want to grant immunity, the great families, the 10 senators. If he chooses the Archduke, he will become their enemy. When Ethan said that he understood his doubts, but the deal was quite profitable, he looked up at him and became very upset, seeing him cutting his palm. He told him not to worry, he just wanted to show him the goods. This potion is as effective as a minor healing potion, but it costs only 1/10 of the usual price. He poured the liquid onto his wound and it hissed and began to bubble, and Jaren exclaimed in surprise, "Such a small cost?" He confirmed it. But it is important to measure the amount of herbs and the fermentation time very precisely. He knows other recipes, and if he accepts his offer, he will share them completely free of charge. He held out his hand, which had recently been wounded, and asked what his answer was. Jaren became worried and thought that he had no other way to restore the family to its former glory. He would not simply watch them die silently. He agreed to the contract, and several days had passed since then. Hans came to the Archduke with a report over the past 3 days on cases of contract violations by vassals. First, Baron Kargas has more soldiers than is allowed. There are factions similar to the Red Scorpions throughout the city. The total number of fighters is 3 times the permitted number. Secondly, he collects increased taxes from the residents. He exploits them with the help of his groups, calling it protection. MC was angry about this. He deposed him and his brothers, and is robbing the common people, scum, and he thinks the other 9 families are no better. He asked the Chamberlain to let him look at it and asked who collects taxes in the villages. He gave him the name of Heims, the Baron's confidant. He thinks he is in the village of Rakosis now, just in time for the collection. Ethan said that in that case, they will go there, and the Chamberlain left to prepare everything. MC looked over the report. He thought he would deal with the Baron's family in 4 months, but with the help of the fire mistress, he needs to act faster. He will leave Kargas for later. First he will deal with Heims. After some time, Heims came to Rakosis to collect the money. The old man told him that they had collected everything they had, but they were still a little short. This made the man very angry and exclaimed that he already owed 20 gold. After all, he had even dealt with the Red Scorpions for them. The old man said in his mind that he was a lying pig. Everyone knew that his lordship did this. He asked him to give them a little more time, and then Heims pushed him and exclaimed that it was too late. If he did not have money, let him give up his daughter. He would show him what happens to those who do not pay taxes on time. The old man became worried. He asked him to take anything but his daughter. Finally, Ethan arrived. Hans pointed at the fat man and said that it was Heims. MC said threateningly that he had already realized from afar that he was a pathetic piece of trash, and Heims thought, is this Hans? That guy who was sent to the wilderness and who is next to him? When he saw the powerful aura he was emitting, he became very agitated and called out to Don, saying that he was his protector and that he should do something. At that moment, he wondered what that burning manna was. He saw it as a threat and placed his hand on the hilt of his sword, ordering him to stop. He would be punished by law for disobeying the Baron if he came any closer. He thought he was low on mana, but why was he feeling such monstrous pressure? Ethan drew his sword and told him not to make fun of him. He didn't even want to hear such things from robbers. Dakan also drew his sword and called him impudent. He dared to threaten them? Did he want to die? He swung his sword and confidently told him that he was the only one who would die here. After that, he lunged at him in a jump, and Dakan looked up at him in surprise and noted that he was fast, but his trajectory was simple. He decided to block the blow and immediately counterattack. His opponent's blade was already very close, but an instant before the strike, Ethan changed trajectory, causing Dakan to become confused. After that, MC struck him in the side with his sword. He dropped the sword from his hands and grunted in pain, and then he was thrown aside. All eyes were now glued to Ethan. The guards were shocked that he had defeated the knight with one blow, and Heims, calling them blockheads, asked why they were standing there. Let them stop him immediately. Hans heard them and told them not to even try. The Archduke himself was before them. Let them immediately lay down their arms and surrender. The guards immediately began whispering. They had already learned that it was he who destroyed the Red Scorpions, and so they obediently laid down their weapons, not wanting to get hit. MC noted with a smile that they knew their place. And what about Heims? He took the frightened man away for a private chat, and that's how they ended up in his mansion. Ethan remarked that he was living even better than he was. He had settled in quite well. Heims replied that it wasn't his fault, but Baron Kargas's. He ordered him to collect more taxes, and everything was recorded in the ledger he kept. MC looked through the ledger and thought there was enough evidence, after which he called Hans. It turned out he had already recorded everything on the memory sphere, and Ethan said that when he was finished here, he should give Baron Kargas this scroll. Before leaving, he glanced at Hymes and said that the Baron ordered him to collect more taxes, not to fill his belly. He should make sure he didn't return to his vile deeds again. Hans, looking satisfied, flexed his fists and said that he understood everything, and Hymes, realizing what awaited him, became very nervous. Sometime later, Helmut received a letter and was contacted by Shimon Furness. He asked, so the Archduke was pressuring him to increase his power before the Senate meeting and bring everyone to their knees? Did he understand everything correctly? In that case, let him act. They still need to find out more about him. Let him inform him if he finds out anything. As soon as the crystal ball went out, Helmut screamed in rage, barely restraining himself from breaking it, and thought that they decided to use him as bait. He received a letter from Ethan, in which he wrote that he knew that he violated the vassal contract and collected more taxes. He wondered how he managed to deal with 3 tax collectors. They were accompanied by knights. Apparently, there was no other way. He crumpled the letter in rage and called the butler, ordering him to send Ruin to the hovel so that he would invite the Archduke to his mansion. He could no longer underestimate him. He would meet with him and sort this out. The protagonist smiled and thought that in recent weeks he had dealt with almost all the tax violations. Baron Kargas was probably furious. Then he heard a knock on the door and said he could come in. Myers entered the room next, smiling. He asked, "Ethan, did you call?" He answered in the affirmative. He added that he should get ready. He would soon be heading to a branch family. He wanted to ask him something. Myers looked at him in surprise and asked, "Huh?" He came closer and asked, "What is he talking about?" "What other family?" The protagonist told him not to worry. He would explain everything in a moment. He held up 3 fingers and added that there were 3 reasons why he was sending him there. He looked surprised. 3? He rose from his seat and answered, "Exactly." First, as he already knew, after Terran's departure, only 2 contenders remained for the position of head of the family. But it was unlikely that the other families would calmly watch as he destroyed the Kargas. Besides, he had an immunity, against which they were powerless. Secondly, they want to maintain their influence, and will be against him becoming the leader. Therefore, they will probably try to promote him and make him a puppet. They have already tried. Thirdly, if they think he is on their side, they will give him all the support they can. Then Myers nodded and said, "Okay, now everything is clear to him." MC added, "They are crossing the Rubicon. Anything can happen to him." But, before he could finish, Myers said that he understood what he was trying to say. "Everything will be fine." Then the protagonist thanked him, and he asked, "So he just needs to pretend to be on their side and enlist their support?" Then the protagonist came closer and putting his hand on his shoulder said, "Right, as long as they support him, they will not actively interfere with him. In the meantime, he will prepare everything to destroy them. The target is one of the most influential families of Count Furness. Hans will go with him, so he need not worry." Then Myers clenched his fist and, smiling, said, "Okay, he can handle it." After some time, the boxes were being secured to the carriage, and Marie walked forward, folded her arms across her chest, and asked, "Is he seriously leaving?" Myers looked at her and asked, "What?" She replied that he shouldn't ask her. He had to answer the question. She put her hands on her waist and indignantly shouted, "He's just going to leave for 6 months without any preparation." In response, he apologized and, smiling, said that he would try to write more often. She replied, "Yes, he must try." Then the main character approached them and told Myers to wait. He looked at him in surprise and asked, "Yes?" He said that he believed in him and always had, but he must be careful. Myers smiled and shaking his hand said, "Of course, he can rely on him." Then he approached the carriage and waving his hand, said, "Well, he's off." Then the coachman spurred the horses forward. After a while, another carriage drove past them and hit a rock. Ruin was inside this carriage and shouted, "Damn it, what kind of roads are these?" Shirin sat across from him and said, "Really, is the Baron really worth this much torment?" Then Ruin chuckled and said he should tell him what they had to go through. "By the way, how much did he send this month?" He placed his hand on the chest and said generously, 100 gold pieces. Ruin shouted in surprise. "What? 100 gold pieces? Wasn't there just 1 gold piece last month?" He frowned in irritation and wondered if he had cut his salary when he lost a little at cards, and yet sent these pathetic scum a whole 100 gold pieces. Then he told him to listen, Chiron. He asked, "Yes, sir?" He held out the bag and offered to leave 10. In response, he laughed, holding the coins in his hands, and said, 10 gold is a worthy payment for his suffering. He can take it. Then Ruin shouted, "No, they will leave 10 for the scum, and the rest is theirs. He will have some fun." Chiron asked worriedly, "What if the Archduke gets angry? They say he is stronger than some knights." The Baron said to be careful with him. He grinned and asked, "This is 10 times more than last time. Why would he be angry? He can't do anything to him. He is a 3rd-rank knight." Then he laughed loudly. At that moment, the protagonist remembered Terran saying, "Brother, he shouldn't worry. He can go. He will defend this place to his last breath until he defeats the Demon King." Then he swung his wooden sword, attacking the dummy, and thought, "Terran, is everything all right?" Since he woke up, he hasn't heard anything about him. He understands his feelings. He's probably done everything he could to keep this family together. It irritates him that he knows nothing about his situation. He wishes he could just take him back to his family. Then he gritted his teeth, concentrated his energy, and delivered a powerful blow. After that, he thought he doubted it would be that easy, and that made him even angrier. At that moment, a carriage stopped next to him, and he turned around in surprise. After that, Chiron got out of the carriage and, opening the door slightly, said, "We've arrived, sir." Then Ruin, putting his hands in his pants pockets, said, "My God. Do you have to live in such a remote place?" At that moment, the protagonist looked at him and wondered, who the hell is he? In response, he tossed him a bag and, with a slight laugh, said that he was the one who brought the allowance from Baron Kargas. What would he say? He was sure he didn't expect to see so much money. At that moment, a coin flew out of the bag and stopped near the protagonist's foot, and he looked at it, and Ruin told him to look. The beggar was speechless at the sight of gold. Why would they bow to the Duke's family? What? He won't even thank him for such generosity. Last month, he remembers, he gave everything. But before he could finish speaking, MC punched him in the face, sending him flying to the ground and clutching his bruised nose. The protagonist came closer and asked, had he misheard? Since when did the Baron become more important than the Duke? Then he grabbed Ruin by the clothes, and he indignantly shouted, "What is he doing?" Then he lifted him up and said, "Must he repeat who he is?" He answered, "Kargas." He asked, "What Kargas?" Then he added another punch to his face and said, "Baron Kargas." Ruin grabbed his face and screamed loudly, "He's a damn psycho, he must die." With these words, he concentrated energy in his body. The protagonist looked at him in surprise and thought, this aura, did he also study their breathing technique? Then Ruin grabbed his hand and shouted that he would break his arms. Did he understand? The protagonist thought, but how pathetic. Then Ruin shouted, "Huh? What nonsense." The protagonist thought, they clearly know this, but they barely realize their potential. Self-taught? Then he concentrated energy in his fingers and thought, good thing he knows the technique for blocking. Then he delivered several strikes with his fingers, which sent Ruin flying to the ground and shouted that he didn't even feel it. Then he was surprised, huh? Then he knelt down and, looking at his hands, shouted, "What? What the hell? What did he do to him? You freak." He replied that he sealed the mana. He was surprised. Sealed? MC said, of course, the thief of the technique would understand how it works. In response, he shouted at him not to mess with him. He charged, swinging his fist, but the main character easily dodged his attack and delivered a powerful blow. After that, he looked at Chiron, who had fallen to the ground in fright, and asked, "Hey, so why did they come?" He handed him a letter and replied, "It's an invitation from Baron Kargas." The protagonist reached for the letter and asked, "An invitation?" He replied, "Yes," and he sent them not 10 gold, but 100. Then MC looked at the letter and told him to put it all in the bag. He replied, "Yes." Then he thought, an invitation, and he kept wondering what he would throw away. A personal meeting, then. This only plays into his hands. The next day, Marie walked forward and asked worriedly, "Ethan, are you sure everything will be okay?" The protagonist told her not to worry, he was just invited to talk. She said, "Ethan." She didn't. Before she could finish speaking, MC approached the carriage and said he was leaving. She shouldn't worry, he'd be back soon. Marie watched the carriage go and said, "Ethan?" Then the coachman told the horses to get moving. Then Marie folded her arms and said she wanted to ask why he needed a sword if he was just riding to talk. Then the protagonist, riding in the carriage, thought that the Baron's fate was already sealed, no matter what he came up with. But since he'd invited him, he decided to interfere until the end. They'd see what he could do. Sometime later, the town of Porit, he thought, here's the Baron's mansion. A palace too luxurious for such a city, hiding people's suffering behind all this luxury, and blaming it all on the Arden family. And for such people, they shed blood on the battlefield. Then the coachman stopped the horses and said, "Your Grace, they've arrived." The protagonist exited the carriage, and Dexter stood in his path, asking, "Hey, so this is the guest?" He placed his hands on his waist and said, "I told my father there was no point in wasting time." Where was his younger brother, the one they sent for him? The protagonist then approached him, looked him in the eye, and asked, does he even know who he's talking to? Or hasn't the Baron even taught him respect for the main family? Then Dexter grabbed him by the clothes and shouted, "What? Isn't he being too arrogant just because of a title?" He asked in response, "Is he being arrogant?" He was indignant. Was he finding it funny? Then the protagonist kicked him in the stomach, sending him flying far back. MC said it was funny that such a scumbag would even try to teach him anything. Dexter thought indignantly, what? He'd been hit. He hadn't even noticed. At that moment, the protagonist threw a tied-up Ruin at him and told him to get his brother. Dexter shouted indignantly, "Did he do this to him?" He smiled, looking at him, and asked, "Who else?" Then Dexter grabbed his weapon and, concentrating his energy, shouted, "Idiot, he'll finish him off." He struck in front of him, and the protagonist, dodging the blow, thought, is this one the same? They can't even master the basics of stolen goods. Then he struck again in front of him and shouted in surprise, "What?" He thought he missed. Where did he go? And the protagonist grabbed him by the hair and slammed his head into the ground, covering it with cracks. Then he reached for the weapon behind his back and said, "Such a man is not worthy of being called a knight. They will finish it all with the next blow." The next second, Menharten pointed his sword at him and shouted at him to stop right now. Their swords crossed, and then they jumped apart. The knight said that he was Menharten, the commander of Baron Kargas's knights. "Archduke, he has crossed the line. He must show prudence and stop. He must not force him to use force." Then MC lowered his sword and asked, "Did he cross the line?" And he, who raised his sword against the Archduke, The heir of the main family? Did not? Okay, force so force, he must try to block the next blow. Then he pointed his sword at him and said that if he was threatening him with force, he'd better be stronger than this bastard. He said, in that case, he begs for forgiveness. He abruptly charged, and the protagonist followed him with his eyes and held his sword out in front of him, blocking his attack. Then Menharten dodged to the side, and he thought, he's good. Then he struck, and the protagonist parried his attack again, but a small cut appeared on his arm. Then Menharten gritted his teeth and thought, I need to push him back. He jumped up and swung his weapon, and the next second, clouds of dust rose into the air, and Menharten, flying to the side, thought that he had blocked his view. Now he could disable him, without seriously injuring him. Then he looked ahead in surprise, noticing a weapon pointed at him, emerging from the smoke. He thought, it can't be, he's going to kill him. Then he closed his eyes, and the protagonist's sword flew past him. He looked to the side in surprise and wondered why he had stopped the attack. He would have definitely hit him. Had he really spared him? The next second they heard a scream. Ruin! The girl crouched down next to her son, lifting him up, and her subordinate ran after her and shouted, Madam, it's dangerous here. She shouted, Baby, he needs to open his eyes. She clenched her teeth and, looking at the protagonist, screamed indignantly, How dare a half-dead duke touch her son? She pointed her hand at him and ordered him to seize this psychopath. Then she looked at Menharten and shouted, Menharten, why are you standing there? At that moment, Helmut shouted, Enough. He looked at everyone present with irritation and walked forward. His wife followed him and said, Darling, that lunatic beat their sons. He looked at her and said that he knew he would sort everything out, she should leave. Then he turned to Menharten and told him to take care of his wife and Ruin. In turn, he lifted the wounded boy and said that he obeyed. After this, Helmut spread his arms and said, It's been 10 years since we've seen each other, Your Grace. Perhaps they could release his son so they could talk? The protagonist stepped forward and said, That's right. It's been a long time since we've seen each other for many reasons. Unfortunately, he could not fulfill his request. He pointed his sword at Dexter, who was lying on the ground, and said, Great is the sin of one who raised a sword against the Duke. Now only execution awaits him. In response, he asked him to calm down, Your Grace. Dexter, he asks for forgiveness on behalf of his son. He may have immunity, but the Duke's authority has long been empty. The Senate now rules these lands, and they will judge his son. He offered to settle all misunderstandings, and they will join forces, then his family can become great again. Then MC said, Baron Helmut, if the Duke's family doesn't rule the duchy, then why do they even exist? With these words, he struck his sword in front of him, and Helmut cried out in fear, Dexter. But then he noticed the tip of the protagonist's sword embedded in the ground next to his son's head. He reached for his sword and shouted, enough testing his patience. He concentrated his energy and shouted, if he wanted to live, he must release his son and beg on his knees for forgiveness. Forgiveness, he asked? He must make him laugh. Then he lifted Dexter by the scruff of his neck and said he had already decided to get rid of his entire family. Then he tossed his son to him and added, he, Baron Helmut, had violated the vassal contract. To cover up his crimes, he threatened the Duke's descendants. He is accused of treason and will be stripped of all rights, title, and castle. With these words, he pointed his sword at him, and the Baron indignantly said, How dare the vile boy threaten him? He pointed his hand forward and ordered his subordinate knights to deal with him. He clenched his teeth in irritation and said, They're acting according to plan. They must make sure he can't interfere with them anymore. He'll cripple them. The protagonist smiled and said, he knew he had something hidden, the dirty idiot. Sometime later, Palantium, the capital of the kingdom of Hydern, the king, sitting at the head of the table, looked at those present and asked, Is there anything else, or could they conclude the meeting? At that moment, Baron Blotenbessus rose from his seat and placing his hand on his chest said, Your Majesty, he would like to say something. May I have permission? He thought, strange. Why would the Marquis suddenly decide to discuss something? Then he said he would allow it. Bloten said he was grateful, Your Majesty. His Highness, Archduke Arden, contacted him. He thought, the Archduke, the one who lay in a coma for 10 years after the mana surge, since when did he have any dealings with Bessus? Then he asked, and for what reason? He replied that he had said that Baron Kargas had violated the vassal contract, and more than once. He had raised taxes, created secret groups, and outnumbered his army, as well as illegally appropriated and sold information on the Duke's family's secret techniques. Then he looked at those present and thought, he knew it all along. The 107 families were not thrilled with this discussion. Then he said, the evidence is recorded on the memory spheres. His Grace insists on the confiscation of the castle. The king thought a difficult decision. Side with the 7 families supporting the Senate, or join the legendary defenders of the kingdom? Then he tapped his finger on the arm of his chair and said it was not within his purview. The Arden were not members of the Senate, and since the issue concerned only one family, he would not interfere. Let the Archduke handle this himself. Then Bloten said, okay, he'll pass on his words. He thought, so the king hasn't chosen Arden's side? Meanwhile, Menharten brought the mother and her wounded son into the room. He told them not to worry. It was safe here, but the woman continued to cry. Then he pointed to his subordinate and told them to close the window and bring hot tea. The subordinate bowed and said, okay. Then he added that he would go to the Baron. The subordinate told him to be careful there. After that, Menharten walked down the corridor and thought, I don't understand why he changed his mind in the middle of an attack. Damn. He had a bad feeling about this. Meanwhile, the protagonist was fighting several knights. He repelled their attack and struck in front of him. The next second, The knight leaped forward and shouted that he was caught. He struck out, aiming at the protagonist, but he ducked back, then looked at his opponent and noticed one of the knights above. He then pushed off the ground and rose upward. At that moment, Helmut clenched his fist and shouted, "That's it, they must attack simultaneously and let him dodge." Then Menharten approached him and said, "His Grace, madam, her master is safe." He looked at him and said, "That's excellent, his assistance will no longer be needed." Then Menharten looked at the battle and thought, "No, the Archduke isn't attacking on purpose. It's as if he's looking down on them." At that moment, MC continued to dodge the blows, and then he jumped high into the air. He concentrated energy in his weapon and said, 18, 19, ready. Then he swung the weapon, sending forward a powerful slashing attack that struck the ground in front of the knights. At that moment, Helmut shielded himself with his hand and shouted, "Where did he learn that move?" The protagonist landed, and the Baron shouted, "Idiot. He can't win, he just runs away. You'll throw him in the dungeon today to rot, and not for 10 years, but for life." After that, MC chuckled, swung his sword and said, "Just make the next attack long range, I don't want to hit anyone else." After that, he concentrated the energy in his sword again and spun around himself, releasing powerful streams of energy around him. Then Helmut closed his eyes and shouted, "What is this monstrous energy?" Another trick. The protagonist sighed loudly and charged, continuing to concentrate energy in his weapon. The next second, Menharten shouted in fear that he must dodge. MC used Arden's secret technique, the second form, Blast Wave. The powerful energy rushed forward. Meanwhile, Marie reached for the mug, then pulled it back sharply, saying, "Hot." She looked at her hand and said, "I wonder if Ethan's okay." She hoped there wouldn't be any nonsense this time. Then she looked out the window, and resting her face in her hands, added, "Although he was always reckless, it's so strange not to hear their war cries outside the window." Meanwhile, the battlefield was covered in flames, and Menharten, covering it with his hands, thought, "It can't be. He's almost out of mana. Where does this power come from?" The streams of energy continued to advance, and Menharten stood before the Baron, blocking him with his sword. At that moment, Helmut's mouth fell open in surprise, and he thought, "How is this even possible? These are elite knights, each of whom can handle several thousand ordinary soldiers," and he cut them down with a single blow. At that moment, the protagonist's hand began to tremble, and he looked at it and thought, "There's almost no mana left. Is this the limit?" Without the Fire Lord's blessing, he would have already passed out. Then he said, "Baron Helmut, it's his turn." He asked fearfully, "Huh?" And then the protagonist approached him and said, "Years of abuse against his family deserve severe punishment." And he fell to the ground in fear and shouted, "Knights, he's probably exhausted by now. Whoever kills him will receive 500 gold. And at that moment, Menharten thought, this is impossible. His attack wasn't just powerful. The huge wave of fire hit only those he wanted. He'd never seen anything like it before. All the survivors already understood the difference in strength. Even if someone could get up, they'd be smart enough not to raise their sword again. Then, MC looked at him and asked, "What about him? He didn't want to try again?" He lowered his gaze and noticed that he'd already lost to him. Then the protagonist asked, "Did you hear that, Baron?" He then concentrated energy in his hand and placed it in the Baron's chest. Menharten then reached out to him and cried out in fear, "Your Grace." And the protagonist said, "Sir Menharten, he should lock the Baron in the dungeon and keep an eye on him." He looked at him and cried out in surprise, "What? He's suggesting that I throw my own master in the dungeon? He's a knight." He swore an oath. He stepped forward and said, "Yes, a loyal knight. That's why he's entrusting him with this. A traitorous Baron who would lose his title for his crimes." He walked past him and placed a hand on his shoulder. He added that if he tried to escape, his entire family would be executed according to the law. A loyal knight must not forget his oath. Then Menharten clenched his fist and said, "It shall be done." After a while, the Baron grabbed the bars and, looking at the knight standing across from him, shouted, "Idiot! He thinks he's going to get away with this? He must let him out now. Sir Menharten." He orders him to open the door. Then MC placed a hand on Menharten's shoulder and said that he could handle the rest himself. After that, he walked to the exit, and the knight said, "Your Grace, may I ask you something?" Everyone, including him, attacked him on the Baron's orders, so why did he spare some? The protagonist turned around and replied, "A sword is a reflection of the soul." Had he never heard that knights speak the language of blades? When he came to, he was surrounded by equally vile people. They wished the death of his entire family, those who had saved the country. But, having crossed swords with him, he realized that there were still people who respected this family, and he sighed with relief. It didn't matter whether he was driven by remorse or melancholy. Whatever the reason, there were people loyal to the ducal sword, and that was enough. Menharten looked at him in surprise, then the protagonist turned around and added that he had completely lost his temper. He would leave this position to him, Menharten. After some time, Baron Helmut's office. MC walked inside and Raymond stood there. He bowed and said, "He greets him, his grace." The protagonist looked at him thoughtfully, and he placed his hand on his chest and said that he was Raymond, the Baron's eldest son, and he was waiting for him. The MC walked further and asked, was he waiting for the one who imprisoned his father and brothers? He doesn't know what he wants, but he advises him to choose his words carefully. At that moment, Raymond thought, calm down, he's not like his father and brothers. Then he spread his arms wide and asked if he wanted to make a deal. The protagonist smiled and asked, a deal? But he kept thinking about what he would say. It seemed he still didn't understand the situation he was in. Deals are made with people of equal standing, The next second, he grabbed him by the neck and lifted him into the air. He added, "The Baron's family committed treason, raising a sword against the Archduke. Does he still think he has the right to bargain?" At that moment, Raymond trembled and thought he couldn't breathe. He needed to say something before he suffocated. Then he said, "Information about the seventh family." The protagonist thought, "The seventh family?" After that, he let him go and said he could speak. Raymond fell to the floor and started coughing loudly, and MC came closer and said that if he deceived him, he would immediately go to prison. He replied that no, he really did have information about them. After that, he handed him a book and told him to look at it. It was an agreement on the transfer of secret techniques. When the Arden house was destroyed, the seventh great family demanded a book describing secret techniques from the Duke's vassals, all in order to strengthen the army and counter the threats of neighboring countries. Therefore, they had no choice but to give it to him. The protagonist sat down at the table and said that the notes hadn't been of much help to his knights. He replied that they were never able to unravel all the secrets. The seventh family sold them a simplified version. MC asked in surprise, "What?" Then Raymond handed him the next book and said, "This is it." The protagonist put his hand to his head and sighed, thinking, give him the full version, then buy the cut version from them. How could they be such idiots? Then he started leafing through the book, and Raymond said the price for decryption was enormous, so they had to raise taxes. After that, he slammed the book shut and noticed that it was trash. He was surprised. "What?" He said, "This book, this is the most useless thing. No one in their right mind would share something so important." He squeezed the book in his hand and added, "They were simply used and everything was taken away." Then he thought, war is a time to forge alliances and unite, and in peacetime, everyone only cared about their own wallets. Then he said that he would